Now we need to actually edit the store. So when we have a button up here, you click it, we're going to be editing the actual store. So first thing we need to do is have a button here. So we'll go into our store's action, and where we have that button soon, we'll remove that. And we need a div with the class of store underscore action, and a div with the class of store underscore action dash edit. And again, if you're not used to this class naming syntax, this is just BEM. It helps us write CSS, so it's not nested in a nice, clean fashion. So that's what we have there. And then inside of that, we need an SVG icon inside of a link that will be a pencil. So we'll say a ref equals, and now it needs to be /store /123 /edit. So we need to make this part 123. We need to make that the ID of our store. Now we haven't talked about this yet, but if we open up our MongoDB Compass here and you look at any of your actual stores here, you'll notice that every single store has an ID identifier that we didn't give it. So MongoDB by default will assign a unique ID to every piece of content that you have, every document that is stored in its database. And we often use this ID for being a sort of like a, not necessarily a primary key, but a way to uniquely identify a piece of content that will never be duplicated. So the way that we do that is we need to switch this to backticks, because we're going to be generating a string here. And the ID is going to be $ curly brackets. And inside of that, we say store._ID. That's how you access the actual ID. Then inside of that, we need an SVG icon that will be a pencil. And the way that we do that is, if you look at helpers.js, you'll see that I also have this icon function. And all it really does is it reads a SVG file and will include it. Because you'll know that if you use an image tag with an SVG, there's no way for you to set the fill color or style it anyway. It's just a solid image tag. But if you actually include the SVG code, then you have full access to working with that SVG. So there's a whole bunch of different ways. You can also use SVG sprites and whatnot, but this is just a short way that we can do it without having an additional request on page load. So we go in here and we tell Pug that we are going to be writing some HTML, and that's with bang equals. And you say h.icon. That's the method that we're looking for here. And you ask for pencil. And what that's going to do, if we look at it here, it's going to include all of the code of the SVG that is in public images icons pencil.svg. So we've got that there. Let's refresh and see what we've got. Good. Now we have a pencil icon. And real quick, it's not store, it's stores with an S on it. So refresh. Now just click on any one of them, and you should go to, there we go. You go to a URL /stores /the ID of the store /edit. Now it's going to 404 obviously because we need to hook up our route in order for it to work. So go back to our index.js and we'll write a route for that specific URL combination. The router.get /stores let's just do 123 /edit. So the question now is, this part is going to be dynamic. How do we do like a wildcard route that will match anything of this pattern? Well, what you do is you put a colon and you put the name of the parameter that is going to be passed in. So we'll call that ID. And then when we visit this page, we're going to have a variable available to us on our request object that tells us what the actual ID of the URL is. Good. Then we can take our store controller here. Let's preemptively run catch errors because we were going to need to do that. And then we're going to say store controller dot, and we're going to make one called edit store. Good. Now let's go back to our store controller now, and we'll make a new method here called edit store. Exports.edit store is equal to, we'll make it async. Again, a lot of these that anytime you're dealing with database, you're going to make it async. And then I should also say, like, if you make something async and you don't end up actually using anything, there's no harm in doing that. So don't feel like, oh, I'm not sure if I should make it async or not. We need to do a couple things. First, find the store given the ID. 2, we need to confirm they are the owner of the store. So that's something we're going to have to wait on because we don't have any login sessions just yet, but we will do that in the future. And then 3, we need to, well, that's 4. There's 3. Render out the edit form so the user can update their store. Okay, good. So first things first, find the store given the ID. So how do I get the ID? Well, I told you there's request, and on that is going to be something called params, which will give you any parameters that have come through the URL. Again, what are params? Params are anytime your URL contains something like this, a colon, and then actual value in front of there. So we can go back into our controller, and let's just try response.json request.params. Let's just send back the parameters that we have, see what we're dealing with. So I'll refresh. And there we go. We're immediately sending back the ID parameter that we have here. So if I change this to 123, it's going to give us 123. If I change it back, there we go. Good. So we know that request.params.id will give it to us, but we need to find the specific store that we have. So we'll say const store equals, we'll take our store model here, and we'll use the find one method here. And this, you just pass it a query. So what is the one piece that we know? Well, of underscore ID is going to be equal to request.params.id. And there's a whole bunch of other methods here. I believe there's a find by ID and there's a find, which will give us multiple ones. We'll be looking into quite a bit more of them. Now, that's not going to work just yet. Why? Because you tell me, what does store.find1 return? What do all these queries in MongoDB return? They don't return the data. They return a promise, an IOU that the data is going to come back. So in order for us to put the actual store into store, right now it's going to be a promise, we need to await that promise to be resolved or to come back from the database. So there we have the store. And again, we can just res.json the store just to see if that data is working. So we'll come here and click on Fish Market. And you'll see, all right, good. So what's happening here is we are finding the store by ID, and then we're just sending the actual JSON object back. I often like to just JSON the object back just to make sure that we know what we have. So good, we have all the data. Let's try another one. Let's go to the bakery. Bakery is working nicely. Really long store name. That one's working nicely. Good. But we don't want to just JSON it, so remove that. Confirm the owner of the store. To do, we can't do that yet because we don't have any account login stuff yet. And then finally, render out the edit form so the user can update their store. So we're going to say res.render, and we already have our edit store layout here. Remember, we did this for adding a store. So we're going to render out the same form. We'll say render out edit store. And a couple things we're going to be doing is we're going to pass the title, which is going to be edit store. And you can make that dynamic if you wanted. You could say edit store.name, and that will make it dynamic. And then we also want to pass the store data. So normally, again, we'd say store is equal to store because we've got the data right here, and we need to pass it as a param called store. But you know in ES6, if the parameter name and the variable that you're passing are exactly the same thing, it's not necessary to do that. We can just pass store, and it's the exact same thing. So give that a save. Now we'll go back to our edit store here, and let's just try a quick dump. Pre equals helpers.dump store. Let's click on Fish Market. Good. So you see that we're actually editing the right store because now when we edit this view, the data about the store is pulled from the database and sent along to the template. And if we go to add, you'll see that there is nothing showing up, even though this is the same template. Go back. There we go. Now the question is, how do I populate these fields here, as well as make sure that all the checkboxes are checked? Well, we're going to take that store and get rid of this dump and pass it along to our store form. So the store form gets the store. Then let's open up our store form. Make sure you can spell. There you go. And then it's going to take in a store. And this right here, if we're on the add screen, the store is going to fall back to an empty object. If we're on an actual store page, it's going to actually pass us the store. That's why we've done this here, because we're using the form for both creating as well as editing. So we'll go to the name here. And we'll simply go to our input and we'll say value equals store.name. And if there is a store.name, it will be populated. If not, there just nothing will be there. So let's refresh. There we go. See, fish market on the edit fish page is showing up. Good. Let's go to our description. And inside description, there is no value on a text area. So you need to set it. So equals store.description. Let's check that. Good. So fish market, catch of the day. Now we need to have the Wi-Fi and OpenLay, all these tags. So I'm going to go down here and make a tags array. So we'll say const tags equals store.tags or an empty array. And the reason why I make it an empty array is because down here we're going to use the includes method. And if you try to use array.includes on something that doesn't exist, it's going to throw an error and say cannot read property includes of undefined. So we'll go to our input here. And how do you make a checkbox checked? Well, give it a checked property, and that's equal to, we're going to do parentheses here, because if you want to run a little bit JavaScript, you throw parentheses here, and we'll say tags.includes, if the tags includes, now choice, right? So let's say it's Wi-Fi. We're going to say this huge list of tags, if it includes the word Wi-Fi, then it will return true and checked will be true. Otherwise, it's going to return false, and Pug knows to just omit that checked attribute altogether. Let's give that a save and see if that works. There we go. See, license was checked on that one. Let's go back to another store. Bakery, that one has vegetarian and OpenLay checked, so you can see that they are checked. Finally, we need to actually handle the updating of the URL. And if I were just to submit this, the form action is going to post to add, and we're actually going to create a second store, not update the existing store. So we need to edit this form action in order to appropriately on a brand new one, post to add. And on an editing one, we want to post to add / the ID of the store. Okay, we'll go up to this add and we'll replace it with backticks, because again, every time you use backticks, it means that you're trying to generate a string rather than just hard code a string. So it's going to be /add /, and then we're going to interpolate some data here, store._ID or nothing. And what that will do is if there is a store ID, it will pop it in there. Otherwise, it's just going to be /add. So let's try that out. Let's inspect on that form to make sure it's actually working. So if we open up our DevTools here to this form, you see that the action is /add /58EC, etc., etc. Now, if I were to go to the add page, you see that the action is just /add /nothing. So that's like a nice little trick that we can use so that we can use the same form to add a new store as well as update an existing store. So let's first test that actually adding a brand new store still works. We didn't break anything there. So let's say brew bar and good beers. It's licensed and family friendly. Give it a save. And successfully created brew bar. If we go to our stores page, you should see, there we go. Brew bar is now showing up. Good. Now, if I edit brew bar, and let's say we say really good beers and give it a save, you'll see we get a 404. And did it actually update itself? No, there's no really good beers here. So what's the problem here? And the reason is that when you actually try to save one, it's trying to go to /add / the ID, which we do not have a route for yet. Let's go to our index.js. Here we have a /add, but we don't have one for /add / ID. So what I want you to do is just copy that /add, paste it into another one because it's router.post /add, not get, because this is post. We're posting to the form, and we're going to add one for an ID. And then we are going to change the method not to storeController.createStore, but to updateStore. Good. Then we'll go to our controller, and you guessed it, and we'll create another method, exports.updateStore is equal to a sync, because we're going to be querying for the store and then updating it. Request response, and open that up. All right, so a couple things that need to happen here. First, we need to find and update the store, and then we need to redirect them to the store and tell them it worked. So first thing that we need to know is that we will again get our new store. So const store equals. We'll take our store model and call a method called find one and update. So we could query for the store, bring it back, change the data on it, then send it back to the database and update it. But find one and update is a method in MongoDB that will allow us to sort of do it in one felt swoop, which is really, really nice. We're going to first find one and update takes 3 parameters. First, the query. Second, it takes the data. And third, it's going to take some options. So our query is going to be, we can do this on one line here. We'll say underscore ID is going to be equal to request.params.id. Again, remember that that's coming in from our route. ID is defined right here. So if I called that Wes, then it would be request.params.wes, but it's ID in our case. Then that will find it. And the second one is, what do we update it with? Well, we need all of the fields that have come in from editing our store. So we'll go to our store here. We'll edit the brew bar. And if you were to pass it all of this data, we need to then pass that from our controller over to our database. So we can pass over the request.body, which again is going to be an object filled with every form field that got sent over to it. And then third, there's a couple of things that we need to do here in order to make it work a little bit differently. So we need to pass some options here, which is the curly brackets. And we need to say new is true. And what new is true will do is it will return the new store instead of the old one. And what that means is by default, find one and update will actually return to us the old store, not the updated data. And in our case, we want the updated data because we need to redirect them to a specific page. Then we also want to pass a property called run validators and set that to true. And we're going to run into this because if we look at our model, store.js, remember we said required true. So if somebody updates the store to have no store name, then it by default, it's not going to error out. It only runs those validators against it, like required, true, trim, true. It only runs these things on the initial creation. And we don't want that because somebody could easily create a store and then go back and edit it and take the name off of it. And then we're going to be in a bit of trouble. So by saying run validators true, that will force our model to run these required validators against it. And we'll go into some more advanced validators as we go along in this class. So that's what we got there. Then to run it, you run exec on the end. And some of them by default will not run. By putting exec on the end, it will actually run the query that we have here. Finally, we need to await that data from coming back again, because this whole thing right here will return a promise. And if we await it, it will eventually bring us back the data and put it in our store variable. So that we have updated the value here. Then we will say request.flash, and we want to say success message when that is successfully happened. So we'll say successfully updated. I'm using backticks here so I can put the store.name right inside of it. And you could put like a strong tag around that if you like. And then you could give them a link to it. So aref equals, close it up. And the link will go to /stores/store.slug. And we could say view store. And then finally, we're going to redirect them to the edit page that they were just on. So we'll say response.redirect. Sometimes I get the request and response mixed up. That's a fairly common mistake that you will have. If you have an error, first just ask yourself, did I get my request and response mixed up? Because it is very common. /stores/ we want to grab the store.id /edit. Okay. Woo. So find and update the store, run the validators, tell them it was successfully updated, and then redirect them to the edit screen that they were just on. Good. So let's try it out. So we'll say good beers. We'll change that to really good beers and put an exclamation mark. Save. Hey, there we go. We got our Flask message showing up, as well as we have our brew bar here. And we have a link, I guess, to the actual store to view it, but we haven't created that page just yet. That's coming in just a second. Let's double check that if we add all of the tags, they stay. Good. And you take a couple off and save it. That will work as well. Great.